So good morning, Father Lancy. It's 26th of December 2015, Boxing Day as it's called, and we've had the most amazing Christmas and Christmas Eve. I don't know if you felt it right here in your room, but the city of Mumbai was completely universalized in my experience on the 24th. There were three major religions celebrating the return of the light, the Holy Child, the return of the sun in their own way. It was Datta Jayanti, which is the birth of the three-in-one deity, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva come together. It was also the birth of Prophet Muhammad, and it was Christmas Eve awaiting the birth of the Holy Child. And so all the temples in the city were lit, all the churches were lit, all the mosques were lit. And there was a indescribable sense of well-being and peace in the city. And it was interesting that this movie Star Wars got launched on that very day, which was talking about these themes, whether we could make those connections or not. That the Force awakens, the Force which is the light and love, and that which brings us all together, and which is here for us, whether we know it or not. So today we are going to talk on the lighthouse that philosophers provide, according to you, in the Enchanted Darkness. And you mentioned Aldous Huxley. So I would like you to speak about Aldous Huxley, who seems to touch on this theme where he says philosophers have, well, you have said in your blog, philosophers seem to have a love of wisdom. That's the definition of philosophy. But true philosophers also seem to radiate and embody the wisdom of love itself. So they seem to have got to that sweet spot where their wisdom is love and their love is wise. Can you talk about Aldous Huxley as a philosopher who seems to have found that sweet spot? And through that, maybe talk about soul building, because he may have actually accessed his soul in order to access that sweet spot.
Yes, I think that Aldous Huxley is really a bright light in this whole area. And what you have mentioned about love of wisdom and wisdom of love is a mixture of Aldous Huxley and this Raymond Panikkar, who is more a philosopher than Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley is a historian of spirituality who's quite extraordinary. He brings everything into the picture. He shows very clearly, for instance, how the Buddhists, after saying that there is no self, were the ones who were forced to talk about a self, and brought it in sort of by the back door, as it were, and in the end reached a level of understanding human beings in which the self becomes extremely compassionate, So you wonder sometimes, if there is no self, where compassion and so on fits in. And that's where Aldous Huxley is amazing. He's a real pioneer in bringing all the different varieties of Buddhism, of Christianity, and he's ruthless, in cutting at all the playing with words that go on in the different religions and so on, so that he comes across as a very, very reliable person. So the one person I would recommend strongly reading this is Aldous Huxley, as I would say modified by Raymond Panikkar. There are also some Buddhist writers who, not to confuse things, I won't go into, who really have done a great deal in this area, though logically they shouldn't be believing in anything that is a principle in man that remains, because we have no self.
So keeping to the theme of soul building, one of the other things you mentioned is pluralism of the welcoming heart, not to be confused with the relativism of the conditioned mind. Can you talk a little bit more on that?
Yes. Give me the terms again. It'll be good for our readers also. Pluralism of the
Welcoming heart
yes
is not to be confused with the relativism of the conditioned mind.
yes. The conditioned mind, therefore, has got a point of view which is inflexible. And everything goes because it's a kind of ideology. But the pluralism of the compassionate heart or the welcoming heart is one in which you know why you are doing what you are doing, and you are at peace with it. But you allow other people to have their own. You're truly pluralistic in the sense that it's a very deeply Indian idea also, is that you accept everything and everyone as that's their way of looking at things, okay? It doesn't mean it's the only way. I don't know whether that's satisfying.
Definitely. It's very, very key, I find, to any idea of peacemaking at this time for the planet and for our own individual lives in our own homes. The ability to hold on to our way of thinking if it's clear to us and it serves us, but in a way that's something perhaps the mind isn't capable of, and therefore the heart has the capacity to hold other views and accept them. I think that's very useful to me, and I find I'm working on that very much as part of my own path right now. And that's why I was intrigued by the idea of soul building. I feel soul building is the key to be able to straddle the welcoming heart with one's conditioned mind. It's as if it's a third piece which knows how to bridge the two.
I think that's well said. Very well said, yes. Very well said. I agree with that.
So now let's go deeper into the idea of soul building. You have said we have to make a sincere effort at soul building. I suddenly found a little bit of hope in that. Not just, let's say, I liked hearing that, because the rest of the time we've been talking about the wonder and the mystery and being checkmated by God, who's kind of, this is his show, and you get to feel that, oh my God, I am just at the mercy of this, but hey, it's a great person to be at the mercy of, because it's God, all merciful. And yet, who am I, and do I have any role I can play in the work of this wonder and mystery? And when I read soul building, it gave me a handle on saying, there is something I can make effort on. So what is effort? What is this? What would be a sincere effort at soul building?
See, at a sincere effort at soul building, in my opinion, in a practical way, means that you see the effect of anything you believe in and do sincerely on your innermost self. And this then in the hands of someone, like some of the psychologists, they will try to fit it into their own theories about things, But it's not really that. What one needs to do is to look and see, okay, this is what I believe, this is what I do, this is what I practice, these are the friends I have, this is what they say, this is what I say. Now, as a result of this, do I accept them and love them as they are? Respect their views, and I may very much disagree with them, but I respect their views. And we can't do this unless we make the effort of seeing what the effect of all these ideas and so on which we have is on our soul, on that space which straddles matter and spirit, Actually, Panikkar in this book of the rhythm of being, he has got this beautiful thing in which he says, for me, what is the closest idea I have of God? And he said, God is for me is Akash, space, that infinite sky, which allows everything to grow under it. It embraces everything without forcing things to go one way or another. It's a very significant idea if you think of it. That the sky, which is so much part of our environment and so on, look at the number of different things that go on under the sky. And the sky, of course, includes the ocean, the clouds, so many things that happen. For me, it is incredible that it is the polluted skies of Bombay, for instance, that produce these marvelous sunsets that we have. So there is nothing like good or bad or evil but it's the mind makes it so. If we had this all welcoming thing by not necessarily agreeing with everything which everybody says, you may have to tell people, well, I don't quite see that. Have you looked at it in this other way, But that would imply that you have seen what the effect of this is on your soul inside.
Wow, that's I'm just getting the insight that the world and the corporate world, for example, is talking about diversity and inclusion, and little realizing that for any real lasting effective ability to do that, we need to have each found our soul and built our soul, because the soul is the only ground from which we could truly authentically include diversity.
Yes, I would say so. But I need to look a person in the eye. I need to talk to him or her in practice. As this master in the use of soul, you mentioned him before. I've forgotten his name just now. But he always says, only God knows our real name, and only a final obituary may tell us who we are. He said, because we ourselves sometimes don't know who we are, and that this requires that we build our soul. And when we build our soul, then we are very compassionate, and we are ready to admit, our foolishness even, and even more. This is a fantastic thought. At least it came across as fantastic for me, even in my own development. In other words, unless you are ready to be seen and loved as an interesting fool, you are not going to know what it is to live with soul. It's a beautiful thing. In other words, you're at peace with yourself. You see this, and once you reach that point, then life is marvelous, and dealing with people is also marvelous.
I think that's just brilliant what you said. Unless we are ready to be seen and loved for the interesting fool that we are.
Yes. It is really amazing. I mean, I think you are aware, for instance, that I have ideas about, say, people who are married and are kind of, they go through their marriage, okay? But then I begin to wonder, which of these two, really loves more than the other. And I end up saying, I don't know. I don't know, because if they are in touch with soul, then they may find that they are far more bonded on the soul level than they ever thought possible. I mean, I find that happening with many people I know and love intimately, that it takes me a long time, for that matter, whether it is a person like you or Vijay, whom I've known for a long time. I continually keep discovering new aspects about you, which it implies that I'm in touch with my soul and I'm making efforts to be in touch with your soul.
Brilliant, brilliant. And on that note, to talk about James Hillman as a psychologist who also was working at the idea of soul building. And when we have been working over the years, what struck me about your mentoring approach is it's psycho-spiritual in nature. It's not just spiritual in nature. It includes the psychological self. And that is perhaps what you are referring to, that the soul is both psychological, meaning it's involved here in our mind and our body, and it's also spiritual, meaning it's coming straight from source and spirit itself.
Now, why I love this way of expressing it, your way of expressing it here, is that we have plenty of people we esteem as great spiritualists, as great spiritual guides. And we have plenty of people whom we esteem and pay a lot of money for as psychologists. But what we need is a mixture of both of them, Each one must influence the other, and we cannot do this without an idea of soul and what it is doing to our soul. If I may be very practical, say as a educator, I have often met very disturbed students, and I was going along happily with them. And then they said, I want to go to this psychiatrist, or my parents said, okay, fine. You do this, and please follow their instructions carefully, and if you are not satisfied, you can come back to me. I must assure you that invariably they all came back to me. I was astonished at this, because they realized that if you are purely psychological, whatever the system, and you don't take into account what parents mean. I've known psychologists even in my own college, and counselors and so on, who refuse to deal with parents and family and so on. You cannot do that in India. The parents and family are an integral part of this, of a person's psyche. So anyway.
So, James Hillman, tell me about him. I haven't come across his work.
Yeah, people cannot easily come across his work because he's one of the most brilliant, condensed, and at the same time overwhelming philosophers we have in our generation. Philosophers and psychologists. I mean, what he has to say about beauty, for instance, is something, it's something astonishing. For instance, he can deal with things, without bothering about the morality of it. Like, he's got pages on what he calls Venus nudata, the naked Venus.
Okay.
What it means, for instance, for us to face the beauty of a naked body, what this means, and how we shy away from it sometimes, or we get fascinated by it. Whereas we can't live without beauty. That beauty is part of the joy of life, And so he will say for instance, he'll bring in surprising insights, like if you're traveling, you ask somebody, you came from Bombay to Goa by bus. How was it? What people will talk about is the journey, the road, the bumps. They sat off and they had coffee and tea there and so on. And the basic thing is, what was the effect of that journey on you inside? What difference did it make to you? Did you become a different kind of human being? What was the effect of the sights and sounds on you personally? Damn the bus journey and all this, So he points out how even in ordinary life, we don't take the soul into consideration, whereas if we did, it would be so much more interesting. Yes, of course the road was bumpy, and of course we stopped off for tea here and so on and so forth. But these are the thoughts that came into my mind. And again, I'm not really praising myself. I'm just talking about a point of view. It has happened so often to me, particularly in the United States, I sit next to a person and I'm, reading my prayer book, and then we are in a Greyhound bus, and they say, "Oh, you're reading a prayer book, you're a priest?" I said, "Yes." So they say, "Well, I don't know whether you're like my pastor who has very fixed ideas about everything, but I must tell you that I'm going off into the mountains just to meet my lover." And my husband is furious about this and so on. So a whole sort of thing starts off in which you can see the need of a human being to reveal his or her soul to other people so that they can be loved, not just as from a religious or a psychological point of view, but joining both.
That's very powerful, Father, that there is a deep need in us to reveal our deepest self, the soul, which is our divinest self, to another, only for the joy of that, seeing ourselves in the others, being met, being seen.
Yes, very, very good. See, for instance now, let me tell you, when I went to the United States for the first time, I was in an airplane and the air conditioning failed. This is in the year 1966. So long ago, okay?
The year I was born.
Okay. So I sat down next to an Italian lady and the air conditioning failed. So this Italian lady knew I was a priest. She knew I didn't know Italian. I didn't know Italian, of course, and she didn't know English. But she then revealed to me how, she didn't like to wear underwear in this situation because it made it sticky and so on. I asked her, why the hell is she telling me about all this stuff, But a human being needs to share. So the result was that we had a long conversation without of us knowing the other's language, just in order to be able to share who we were. And then I told her where I was going to study and all this kind of thing. I mean, what was the net result of this? I don't know. But this gives you a practical example of how people really want to go deeply into something. And it often happens with me that, for instance, when I'm talking to someone, I start off on something like studies, and then gradually, as you watch their body language and see what they're interested in, you move on to this, what you call the psycho-spiritual point of view, which in the end I think is very important to us because it has to do with soul. Okay, maybe I can give you another example from my own priestly experience. Once I was so terribly distressed that I could not pray, I couldn't do anything and so on. So I went to the one in charge of the theology studies and said, "Father, I want permission from you to disappear into this particular Jesuit house, which is in a forest somewhere." He said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Nothing is wrong, but I need to just take my violin and play it. I'll just go off into the forest." And I sat down and I played this violin. I mean, I'm not a great violinist, but this was allowed me touch with my soul, Or sometimes at very difficult times when I was principal and there were a lot of difficulties, I used to go off into the hotel of a friend, and he had a room available for me there. And I used to put on the air conditioning, take off all my clothes and dance. I'm not a great dancer either. What was I doing? At the end of this dance, I was perfectly quiet. So these things will invite people to understand that they need to look into something that is beyond psychology and beyond spirituality. Something in between, which has to do with their deepest selves.
I'm fascinated to hear you say this, and you answered the question I was going to ask, but I'll articulate it and say it anyway. You were saying humans have a great need to be seen and to reveal their deepest self to another. And I was going to say, well, what about the introverts? This woman may want to tell you that she doesn't like wearing underwear when it's sweaty, but there are lots of introverts who, and maybe men are different from women in some way, who would never dream of sharing an intimate detail like that.
Yeah, but those are precisely the people who are sick, isn't it?
No, I think you answered the question as well to say they go elsewhere. They don't reveal themselves to someone else, but they go to their violin, or they'll close the doors and then they'll dance.
Get your point.
But they will do it in their own way, but they will reach out to something beyond their ordinary life every once in a while.
Yes. I think you've got it. In fact, what you're really saying is that all this theoretical stuff, which I have discovered from my own experience, etc., is put into practice by many people just in order to be able to live. They find their own solution to it.
Yes.
But if we then intellectualize this, it is all has to do with the soul.
Yeah. So James Hillman, does his work kind of transcend his own field of psychology and the intellectual models and all that, and take his clients to this innate ability to connect with themselves?
I don't know. I don't know him personally. What I do know is that if I look at it from outside, from my experience of people, he seems to be a person who has got a mind, a heart, an imagination, and a learning which transcends anything I have seen in anybody. So when he writes, he will touch on literature, on art, on psychology, on mythology, on everything, in different languages, etc., etc. So now what would happen in practice with the client he's dealing with, I don't know. If you read only his books, you simply are overwhelmed. And what I do with his books is to go carefully to say, okay, now this thing responds to something I can practice and which I can live with and which means something to me. But like the bus journey. But that guy seems to be a genius of quite extraordinary proportions.
It would seem he is in touch with his own soul.
Yes.
And which is why he knows how to be in touch with another's.
Yes, he's in touch with his own soul, but he is in touch also with the souls of everybody else.
Yes.
That's what makes him difficult as a writer. That's what makes it difficult for somebody reading him as a writer. Like, if anybody wants a real introduction to his really all-embracing thinking, there's a book called The Blue Fire, which I once lent to your husband. And I don't know whether he had a chance to read it. But it's an amazing book. I mean, no ordinary person can come to terms with it, with all of it. He seems overwhelmed by his own, overweening or exceeding genius.
Exceeding?
Genius.
Okay, so soul building seems it's something that we can use our mind and get to. We can use an open, welcoming heart to get to. There's so many doors to and ways and paths to soul building. What about moving to Stuart Voytilla, where you describe him as someone who uses myth making and the language of the medium of film to kind of point us in the same direction. So you called Stuart Voytilla, we're moving to our third lighthouse now in today's conversation, as a myth maker who seems to have understood the power of soul building or is definitely connected with that idea. So what is it that makes you connect Stuart Voytilla with soul building?
Well, I think I've learned as much from you personally as Stuart Voytilla, in the sense that what I have read of Stuart Voytilla, because I'm not an expert on him, is that he points out how the idea of myth has got into the making of famous movies. And from you, I discovered that this also tells you a lot about how the male journey may be different from the female journey, for instance, which is not what he deals with. What he deals with is a very practical thing of trying to tell you, look, I mean, unless you use myth, the movie doesn't sell or doesn't catch. So I would put my influence in that, with Stuart Voytilla and with you. In other words, I know very little about this whole thing. I only know for sure, and that is something that I keep working on, and I must admit I'm very unsuccessful in most people. The word myth in English conveys the completely wrong sense, of something that is, as time goes on, you realize it is a farce. No, but the thing is, we can't live without myth. Myth allows us to deal with horizons rather than boundaries. It makes us go beyond what we can see and sense with our eyes, And in fact, all of us are living by myths, whether we accept it or not. So what I'm really saying is that part of the effect of these interviews which I'm having now has been to refine my own thinking, to deepen it, to see the gaps in it. And this is one reason why I like so much this book, The Rhythm of Being. It's full of this kind of stuff. Absolutely full. He points out to all the myths that are available in different cultures and traditions, and points out to the fact that they all deal with what he calls a cosmotheandric scheme. Cosmos meaning the universe, theos meaning God, and andros meaning man. In other words, there is nothing we do that doesn't cut across these three layers.
So how is myth making connected to soul building?
Yes, well, it will be connected to soul building to the extent that we are in touch with what we are doing, which is very rare amongst people, and was very rare with me too. Okay? In other words, it's not that I was not doing soul building, but I didn't know what I was doing. That's why I come back to the thing that many of us do this thing spontaneously and unconsciously. It's only when we start having interviews and doing this that we kind of realize, hey, that's soul building, isn't it? Like I think one of the great disciples of this chap you mentioned, the Blue Fire man,
James Hillman,
is an ex-Catholic priest, who was more and better known and a bestseller compared to James Hillman. But he applies this kind of thing beautifully, He mentions how when the chap, who is that great Negro leader who was shot and killed? Martin Luther King. When Martin Luther King died, what he did was to go to the piano and play. Just to play. And they just, what was he doing there, Soul building. And he recognized it. He said that's the best thing I could do, the most I could do, and the appropriate thing to do. He, for instance, also points out that this is a very good example for some of the housewives and so on who are reading what he says. that the very act of hanging clothes on a clothesline outside and feeling the breeze and the smell of those clothes and so on and so forth can be an extremely deep spiritual experience. I think it's so right. But this is what many of our housewives are doing without talking about it. You know, the smell you get of fresh, clean linen there fluttering in the breeze, and when you see it dried out and it comes out finally, that you take a pleasure and joy in this. So, one of the most important effects of soul building is that it makes ordinary life a wonder.
What I'm hearing then is that soul building is necessary. Sometimes we are doing it unconsciously, and making it conscious would be a good thing, because then we could do it more often, and it could just ease life even more. But there are some people who may not even be doing it unconsciously, leave alone consciously. And what happens then? And this is the whole idea of the myth, right? That the myth will come and grab you, whether you like it or not, and won't let you lie unconscious and without your soul building work for too long.
See, let's take the practical example we have in which all Bombay goes mad with Ganpati. Now, this is a myth with many dimensions, but it responds so deeply to the needs of people that for a few days nothing else moves in the city. It all started with an idea of thumbing the noses of the British, at having something religious which they couldn't object to, but it really was political in its origin. From this it has passed to all kinds of things. Or the Ramayana and so on. There again, how many Ramayanas are there? I think we cannot live without this myth. And what you and I are doing at this moment, in my opinion, if I intellectualize it, is to relate the using of myth to the building of soul.
Yes.
That's what we are doing.
Well, maybe we can move from Stuart Voytilla to Joseph Campbell, who was really his inspiration, who seems to have discovered this whole idea of myth making as a key necessary tool that the universe seems to use to build soul.
Yes, but you'll notice therefore that the level at which we are talking is very far advanced from Joseph Campbell. In other words, we should recognize that Joseph Campbell was a pioneer. I mean, he was using words and concepts for people who didn't see things that way at all before. In fact, many people considered him to be an enemy of religion and so on and so forth. But as a matter of fact, he's one of the persons who would stabilize religion most of all. So, this is the function again of most pioneers. And that's why I come back again and again, at least at things I write and speak about, to Einstein. To Einstein was one of the most rational of people you could find. He always said, the mysterious is the origin of all art and science. And if that is what is religion, then I am the most religious person you can imagine, In other words, the mysterious is what holds me. When you say what mysterious, to me, I put it in a simple way when talking to people. The mysterious is what? The more you know, the more there is to know. The more you love, the more there is to love. That's what mystery means. You never come to the end of it.
So are you saying, coming back to Joseph Campbell, as a myth maker, and myth makers being lighthouses, since we are now drilling down into the work of Joseph Campbell and the life and the being of Joseph Campbell, are you saying that he was a pioneer and so much has since been done on his original insight that he left the world, That today we are talking at a different level. Is that what I heard you say?
I think we are discovering the deeper dimensions of what you were saying.
Okay.
I think this has happened with all great people, whether it's the Buddha, whether it's Jesus Christ or something. You come to realize that there are depths in this person which he was knocking at doors, If you like, think why I like Jalal al-Rumi so much, I mean, who could accept Jalal al-Rumi say something like, why are you knocking at doors when there are no doors? I mean, meaning that at some level we are completely naked to each other. So each of us is really a mystery unto himself, a myth, a wonder. And I think that this series of interviews I've done with you has made me realize myself, plus my experiences since May of this year, is that I didn't understand myself either. And in fact, I understand myself less now than before, in one sense, and much more now than before in another sense.
Let's talk a little more about myth and why the world, what kind of a myth the world needs today. I mean, Campbell understood the idea and power of myth and the monomyth of the hero's journey, which is a heroic journey. It translates differently across men and women, but at its core, it's the same. You have to keep growing and evolving. And if you don't, then you're given a crisis or a wake-up call. Then you're thrown into this special world. You leave your ordinary life. You have to make a journey. You have to meet your greatest fear. In that you will be guided. You'll be tested. There'll be allies and enemies, mentors. You slay the dragon, whatever that is, of your own deepest fear. In order to do that, you've got to come into a new capacity and power, which is a gift that you discover you always had but hadn't actualized. And that elixir is then what you are forced to return to the world you had left. You are again thrown out. You have a different kind of crisis if you tarry too long in the special world. You are spat back out into the ordinary world. And this time you come back in order to not just enjoy the gift you unearthed for yourself, but you realize it had a greater purpose, which is to share it with the very community, tribe, world that you had left, and that will redeem or evolve your tribe to the next level. That is a nutshell of the hero's journey. Now, if we understand the power of myth and the reality of that in our lives, whether we like it or not, I'm just trying to build on Joseph Campbell's work, which is what you're pointing me to. What myth do you think the world needs today? Why is Lancy still needing to tell the world about myth making and soul building? What is the next myth available to us, according to you?
I think to realize the wonder of oneself is the basic myth. And to realize that wonder of oneself is due to the fact that we are all, creatures of this unknown mystery, but we don't know what the unknown mystery thinks. So, if I've expressed this, I don't know whether it has come off officially in an interview, but I have expressed this to you, is that the net result of all these journeys I've made since May, is to say, look, I don't really know who I am, and what is more, I cannot really know who I am. I can just muddle along. And for some people, when they are interested, as maybe you are, in the hero's journey or the woman's journey or the man's journey and so on, it takes that form. But ultimately it ends up with saying, the famous words of Annie Dillard are so, we are a faint trace on the surface of mystery, each of us. A faint trace on the surface of mystery. Now there are so many faint traces of so many people on the surface of mystery. So maybe all this ends up by saying, until a human being realizes how marvelous and beautiful and wonderful they are, and that they are really, this is where an act of faith, which is very different from an act of belief. So the act of belief says, I believe in this God and I believe that this happens, so that Ganpati is real or whatever. But an act of faith means you just throw yourself into the unknown and say, I am conditioned. I don't really know, and what is worse is I cannot know all the forces that are within me and outside me. So I just enjoy my life, and I will be told what to do when the time comes. We have this in so many forms, that when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears. Or really, to me, one of the most interesting and subtle of these things are the whole series of Zen pictures, I mean, the people who say, when I started Zen, there were mountains, and then I realized there were no mountains. And finally I came back to the marketplace and which is the same as saying that samsara is nirvana. That already we have this heaven here on earth, and we would be well advised to just enjoy our lives. And we will be told what we need as time goes along. And this is what I feel most about the nature of my illness. I asked, and I was very keen that Vijay came here soon. Because to be honest, I'm being very honest, I don't know what I'll be here tomorrow. That is the nature of the illness I have. I don't know. And yet there is something deep in me which says, don't worry about that, it will be handled. You will go when you have to go, so don't worry about it, just enjoy your life, which is what I'm doing.
So my understanding of Lancy's myth is the myth of the mystery and having a sense of wonder towards it, and really the wisdom of complete surrendering to that, not knowing.
Yes, I think you put it well. Yes. That is my underlying myth, and I think it is the myth which is the most useful of all myths to have. I think all of us have a sense of being in the presence of people. Certainly this happened to me a number of times. Who, they fascinate you because there's something that radiates from them, which is so full of joy and hope and I think ultimately it comes to that. It's I could give you a very practical example if this means anything to people. There was a nun in St. Elizabeth's Hospital, whom my sister, who was also a nun of the same company, said, please go and see her and give her a blessing. So I went to give this nun a blessing. She had been misdiagnosed. She really had cancer, they misdiagnosed it. So she was really dying, I spoke to her for not more than 3 minutes and realized that I was spiritually nowhere near this person. So though she asked me for a blessing, I then knelt down and said, Sister, please bless me also before you go. So she went to Shanti Vedana Ashram, which is our local thing for terminal cancer cases. And it's very interesting how she died also. The day she died, a nun came into the room and said, Sister, how are you feeling? She said, what I like most is a cup of coffee. By the time they brought a cup of coffee, she was already dead. And the whole convent and people around would not take it up with this person who had nothing to offer but her myth. Nothing.
what I'm also getting is like that nun and you may your myth may be articulated in words or through the mind or intellectually, but there is a very, very important but very tangible other intangible part, which is when you actually are able to live this myth, your soul has built, and as a result you and the people around you experience this field of love, well-being, goodwill, peace, and that's a very real rasa, as they would say in the Indian tradition, that people start experiencing even if they don't know that's what they're experiencing, and one needs some degree of awareness and consciousness to recognize, oh, this feels good, you know, soul building feels good to you and to others. It's a gift we give ourselves and others.
Yes, for instance, now again, the idea of rasa, taste. I remember, say, at the end of a whole night of music from, who's this chap who has died recently, this famous chap?
Bhimsen Joshi.
Bhimsen Joshi. And just weeping uncontrollably in the quadrangle of Sanjay. What was he saying? We're just saying God is my father, is my mother, is my daughter-in-law, is this, is that. That was all he was saying, But he was saying it with such unction.
With such?
With such unction, I mean, it's a wrong word to use nowadays. He was saying it with such conviction, with such belief, that he was making it clear to us that God was everything for him. And the audience was totally caught up with this. And I say, I myself, I'm not a Hindu, and still, see, there is a level at which all these distinctions we have between religions, whether it's music or not music, whether it's the hero's journey or the heroine's journey and so on, disappear into something that is much bigger. And I think that's the level we should aim at.
That's the soul building. Can you talk about just the last piece for today? Myth making and C.S. Lewis. And you name him as one of your lighthouses as the three myth makers, along with Joseph Campbell and Stuart Voytilla. So tell us about why you chose C.S. Lewis as a myth maker. And
yes, yeah. I think C.S. Lewis is not in the class of any of these people. He was an extraordinary intellectual and had a group of men. He didn't deal too much with women. He was an Oxford man and extremely intelligent. If you read his book, The Four Loves and so on, you realize that this man could go beyond the ordinary concepts, Like, for instance, one of the myths he developed, which I think is extremely useful on many levels, as I will explain, is that the best love is one of friendship. Because in friendship, you don't get anything. In other words, you share something. It's not as husband and wife, they love each other very much. We need that kind of love, as we wouldn't be here. But if they are not friends also, it's a useless thing. It's at least it's not as useful as it could be. So C.S. Lewis, for instance, opens up for the English intelligentsia the idea that friendship is a value which has a lot to do with real love. And then you come back, if you go deep into this, as I have done on a religious level, you realize in the end that God is our friend. The whole meaning of Christmas is that God said, I want to experience what it is to be a human being. It's one thing to know this intellectually or divinely, to say, I am human. I'm a person like you. That's all. In fact, today's biblical scholars admit in Christianity, when Jesus spoke of the Son of Man, but this he didn't mean I'm the human Son of God. What he meant is I am human. I'm just like you. There's no difference between me and anybody else. So therefore, if I can do all this, you can.
So C.S. Lewis, according to you, what's coming to you as the core learning or insight or light you got from his work is shining the light on the friendship
What I got, yes.
of God.
No.
Of friendship of man, between
the
man,
importance of friendship, yes.
between man as an experience of God or soul. Or
No, that was my extrapolation.
But the myth of friendship as its own
Yes.
gift and ideal.
Yes. The four loves. He's amazing to read, you know. I mean, there was a stage in my life, like when I was a student in the college, you know, doing my graduation, where he just turned me on. As he turned on a person like, I mean, a person who turns you on there again at that level. Who is this other English philosopher who is rather atheistic and so on?
Dawkins.
No, not the present one, the older fellow, Dawkins. Dawkins is not to be taken seriously, but anyway. So there is this chap who he used to be the idol of many of us because he tilt all the religious windmills around. But anyway, the funny thing is that once he had a mystical experience himself, and he was thrown for a loop, you know. He said, gosh, I never realized what it is to feel that way. It is something that is out of this world.
It's a myth of friendship I'm bringing you back to as the work of C.S. Lewis. Friendship is also a mystical experience?
No, not at all. There is so many. See, this is where we come back to something which I have not explained anywhere. I think the real destiny of everybody is to be a mystic. If you understand mystic in the sense I understand, a mystic is one who looks at the whole. Purnamadaha, Purnam
Midam.
That's a mystic. You see, it's a person who, therefore there is no, what shall I say, granted, oh, he's a mystic, or there's something special about him, and he's to be revealed. No, I think anybody who looks at the whole, like if you are with a person, all the thrust of this discussion, I think, was to pick out certain aspects of the whole which are important to your thing, but it's all Purnamada. And it is the title verses which you find in this book of the rhythm of being. Right in the beginning. Purnamada. So I think therefore, I mean, if people didn't feel embarrassed or something by it, or gave it all kinds of religious connotations, our whole effort should be to look at the whole, at everything, at all aspects of the thing, and not just at those things that are important to us, though that is also important. I said to Vijay this thing about, say, it was important to you when looking at the work of your daughter as opposed to those other people, about the state of the world just now. It was important for you to see whether she really was talking as an artist or as somebody who was reacting to all the journalism of our times. Of course. She's my daughter, so I would like to know that. It has something to do with the training I've given her, what kind of person she is, and with my quite understandable pride as a mother. What's wrong with that? It's part of this Purnamada. There's nothing in human life that we need to be ashamed of, What is that famous phrase which comes from Cicero, the great Roman orator? Everything human is important to me.
No, I want to stay with C.S. Lewis. So, any closing thoughts on C.S. Lewis as the last, because then we are done.
No, I don't want to. I think C.S. Lewis was not in the class of the other people you have mentioned.
Okay.
By my secretaries.
All right. Thank you.
Done? Oh,
Wonderful.
Thank you too.